On a beach in southern Russia, something is rotting in the surf. It is longer than a Boeing 747. It weighs more than a fully loaded jumbo jet. It has wings. But it was never meant to fly like a plane. For years it has lain here, half in the water, while tourists climb its rusting hull to take photographs. Once, it was one of the most secret weapons in the Soviet Union. American spy satellites photographed it from orbit and could not understand what they were looking at. A craft the size of an ocean liner, with wings analysts said were far too short to lift it. They nicknamed it the Caspian Sea Monster. This is the story of how the Soviet Union built a machine that should have been impossible, and how it destroyed both the machine and the man who dreamed it, in the very same year. Before we reach that beach, there are three questions worth holding on to. Why did the most advanced flying machine of its age end up abandoned in the sand? Why did the Soviet Navy build only one of its deadliest version when they had drawings for a fleet? And what really happened to the engineer who taught a 500-ton machine to fly on water? To answer them, we have to go back, not to a design bureau, but to a frozen river in 1942. Chapter 1. The Man Who Flew on Water. Rostislav Alexeyev was born in 1916 in a Russia that was about to stop existing. Empire, revolution, civil war, famine, he grew up through all of it. What saved him was an obsession most people thought was useless. He wanted to make boats fly. Not literally. Alexeyev was fascinated by the hydrofoil, a boat that rides on underwater wings, lifting its hull clear of the water until it skims the surface almost without friction. In the 1930s, when he sketched his first designs, the experts told him it would never work at scale. During the Second World War, he was pulled into tank production, but in his spare hours at night, he kept refining the idea no one wanted. Then the war ended, and the Soviet Union needed something to be proud of. In 1957, Alexeyev launched a passenger hydrofoil called the Rakita, the rocket. It carried 64 passengers down the Volga at 60 kilometers an hour, gliding above the water like something from the future. The Soviet public had never seen anything like it. The Rakita was followed by the Meteor, the Kometa, the Sputnik, a whole fleet of flying boats that connected Soviet rivers and coastlines for the next 30 years. They made Alexeyev a star. He was given his own design bureau in the closed industrial city of Gorky, a place foreigners were forbidden to enter. He had medals, he had the trust of the Kremlin. And he had a new idea, one so strange that even his own engineers struggled to believe it. If a wing could lift a boat just above the water, why not lift the entire boat into the air? The principle is called ground effect. Fly a wing very low, a few meters above a flat surface, and the air trapped between the wing and the ground forms a cushion. The wing suddenly becomes far more efficient. It can carry enormous weight on very little power. Birds use it. Pilots feel it in the final seconds before landing. Alexeyev wanted to build a machine that lived in that cushion permanently, skimming across the sea, too low for radar, too fast for ships, carrying loads no aircraft could lift. He took the idea to the very top, and the Soviet leadership said yes. They gave him a budget, a secret shipyard at Krasnoye Somovo, and a deadline. By 1966, on the shore of the Caspian Sea, they had built the thing. It was called simply the KM. In Russian, Kорабль Maquette, the prototype ship. 544 tons, around 100 meters long, 10 jet engines. At the moment it was finished, it was the heaviest aircraft on Earth. And in 1967, a camera in space found it. Chapter 2. The Monster on the Satellite. In 1967, American reconnaissance satellites passed over the Caspian Sea and brought back images that landed on the desks of US intelligence analysts. On a remote Soviet shore sat an object the size of a ship, with wings. And the wings made no sense. They were far too short, the analysts argued, to lift something that enormous into the air. What was it? A flying boat? A new kind of bomber? A hoax? They didn't yet understand ground effect, and so for a while, The machine on the Caspian was simply a puzzle no one could solve. In the West, it picked up a name that stuck: the Caspian Sea Monster. Here's the truth the legend usually skips. The KM was real, and it flew. In its sea trials, it lifted off the water and roared across the Caspian at 500 kilometers an hour, just a few meters above the waves. A 500-ton machine moving faster than a speeding train, low enough to throw spray behind it. For the men who built it, it must have felt like the future arriving early. But a monster has appetites. Flying that low meant the KM could only operate over calm, flat water, which is exactly why the Soviets chose the sheltered Caspian and not the open ocean. A few meters of swell and the cushion that held it up became a trap. It was difficult to steer, it drank fuel, and every flight was a high-wire act balanced just above a hard, flat sea. None of that was visible from a satellite. From space, it looked like a weapon that could change the balance of power. And so the Soviet Union did what empires do with a frightening prototype. They decided to turn it into a fleet. They would build two more kinds of monster, one to carry soldiers and one to sink aircraft carriers. Chapter 3. The Weapon. The first was the A-90 or Leo Nock, the Eaglet. Smaller than the KM, amphibious, with a nose that swung open like a door so it could drive tanks and troops straight up onto a beach. It could cross the Caspian at 400 kilometers an hour, carrying around 150 soldiers, skimming below enemy radar, and land on the sand without a runway, a port, or a harbor. On paper, it was the perfect Soviet marine assault machine. But it was the second weapon that gave the program its teeth: the Loon. Project 903. The Loon was a missile platform with wings, 73 meters long, riding the same ground effect cushion as the Monster, and along its spine it carried 6 enormous anti-ship missiles. Its single purpose was to streak out of nowhere, faster than any ship, below the radar horizon, and put 6 missiles into the side of an American aircraft carrier before the carrier even knew it was there. In 1987, the Loon entered service with the Soviet Caspian Fleet, the only Ekranoplan ever deployed as a genuine warship. And then the Soviet Navy did something strange. They built exactly one. Remember the second question. They had the drawings for more. They had the factory. They had the ambition. So why did the deadliest ground effect weapon ever made stop at a single aircraft? The answer came from the men who actually had to use it. One Soviet admiral who tested the Loon gave a verdict that the propaganda films never quoted. He called it extremely ineffective. The rough seas of any real battlefield, he said, destroyed its one great advantage: speed. In crowded shipping lanes, a machine that couldn't climb, couldn't turn sharply, and couldn't fly in bad weather wasn't a wonder weapon. It was, in his words, simply dangerous, mostly to itself. The monster that terrified the satellites turned out to be a magnificent dead end. Too big to hide, too fragile for the open ocean, too expensive to ever justify. The empire had built a god that could only walk on calm water. But that is the story of the machines. The story of the man was about to become much darker. Chapter 4. The Fall. By the mid-1970s, Rostislav Alexeyev had built an empire of impossible machines. And in the Soviet system, that made him a target. The first blow came from his own creation. During testing, an Orleanok suffered a catastrophic structural failure. The rear of the craft, the tail section, tore away in rough seas. Alexeyev was on board. He took the controls of the crippled, broken machine and flew what was left of it back to safety. You might think saving the craft and the crew would make him a hero. In the Soviet system, it did the opposite. Someone had to be blamed for the flaw, and the blame landed on the chief designer. Around 1975, Alexeyev was quietly removed from the very program he had invented, pushed aside, demoted to experimental work on the edges of the bureau he had built from nothing. He kept working anyway. He couldn't stop. In January of 1980, he was out on the water again, personally testing a new Ekranoplan, reportedly meant to be shown off during that summer's Moscow Olympics. Something went wrong. The craft struck the water hard. Alexeyev was badly injured. He was taken to hospital in Gorky. He went through 2 operations, and on the 9th of February 1980, the man who taught a 500-ton machine to fly on water died, sidelined, demoted, and largely forgotten by the system he had served his entire life. He was 63. And here is the part the popular story almost always gets wrong. People say the monster's crash disgraced its creator. But the timeline tells a colder story. Alexeyev died in February of 1980. The original KM, the Caspian Sea Monster itself, crashed later that same year, brought down not by an enemy, but by a simple fatal error on takeoff. It struck the water, and its crew scrambled clear. No one died. But the machine was too vast and too heavy to ever recover. It floated for a while, alone on the Caspian, and then it sank and was left where it fell. The man and the monster died the same year. The dreamer first. His dream a few months behind him. But the machines he left behind would take another decade to die. Chapter 5. The Unravelling. A program this strange survives only as long as someone powerful loves it. For the Ekranoplans, that protector was the Soviet defense minister, Dmitry Ustinov. As long as he wanted his sea monsters, the money kept coming. In December of 1984, Ustinov died. His successor looked at the Ekranoplan program the way the admirals already had, as a beautiful, ruinously expensive answer to a question no one was really asking. The funding was cut and redirected to something the Navy actually trusted: nuclear submarines. Quiet, hidden, and able to operate in any sea on Earth. Everything the Ekranoplan could never be. A second loon was already under construction. It was never finished. It was reworked, half-heartedly, into a search and rescue craft, and then simply abandoned on its slipway as the money ran out. It sits there, incomplete, to this day. And then, in 1991, the empire itself came apart. When the Soviet Union collapsed, it took the last of the dream with it. The Orleanoks were grounded and left to rot at their moorings, one lost in an accident, one scrapped, just a single survivor towed away to a museum. The mighty loon, the carrier killer, was tied up at a naval base on the Caspian and forgotten. Its weapons were stripped, its engines fell silent, and the most advanced flying machine of its age began, very slowly, to rust. For over 20 years it simply sat there, a secret weapon with no country left to be secret from. Which brings us at last back to the beach. Chapter 6. What Remains. In the summer of 2020, someone finally decided to do something with the monster. Not the KM, that one is gone, lying somewhere on the bed of the Caspian Sea, unrecovered, unmarked. But the loon, the carrier killer, was still there at Kaspisk, and a plan was hatched to tow it 100 kilometers down the coast to the city of Derbent to become the centerpiece of a grand new military theme park. So they floated it. 3 tugboats dragged the 380-ton machine along the Caspian shore, and then, within sight of its destination, the monster ran aground. It stuck fast in the surf, short of the beach, and had to be hauled the rest of the way by brute force, scarring its hull. And there it has stayed. For years, the promised park barely existed, a stretch of sand, a few slabs of concrete, and a colossal rusting aircraft that tourists wandered up to and touched, for free, with nothing to stop them. Only recently have crews begun to patch and repaint it, dressing the carcass up for visitors. So, the first question. Why did the most advanced flying machine of its age end up rotting on a beach? Because it was a magnificent answer to the wrong question. Because the one man stubborn enough to will it into existence was pushed aside and died before it could fail on its own. Because the empire that needed a wonder weapon ran out of money and then ran out of itself. As for its creator, Rostislav Alexeyev lies in a cemetery in the city now called Nizhny Novgorod, under a modest stone. The man who gave the Soviet Union its flying boats, its eaglet, and its monster died demoted and out of favor, and was rehabilitated only long after he could no longer hear the praise. And here is the strangest part of all. The idea would not die with him. The dream of a machine that skims the sea on a cushion of its own air has never quite let the world go. In 2025, the United States quietly cancelled its own attempt to build a giant ground-effect cargo craft, deciding, once again, that the thing was just too hard to make work. And in that very same year, a new monster was spotted moving across the waters off the coast of China. A fresh prototype, the same impossible idea. 80 years on, still refusing to die. Rostislav Alexeyev built a machine that should not have been possible, in a country that could not afford it, for a war that never came. It outlived him by a decade. It outlived his empire by 30 years. And on a beach by the Caspian Sea, it is still waiting for a world that finally has a use for a monster. This has been Iron Curtain Industries. If you want more stories of the machines the Soviet Union built and lost, you know what to do.